Hey, it's Chris with the APICS Coach. We recently sat down with Joe Tillman, founder of T-Squared Logistics and co-author of the WERC DC Measures annual benchmarking study, to learn more about the study and get his insights on 2019 results. From an APICS body of knowledge perspective, you'll hear many key terms referenced, including perfect order, SCOR, balanced scorecard, Kanban, slotting, 80-20 rule, theory of constraints, triple bottom line, and IATA. Joe, thanks for speaking with me today. I look forward to learning more about the 2019 WERC DC Measures study. But before we get into the details, let's kind of start with the why. What's the purpose of the report?
Yeah, Chris, thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. And, that's a great question about why. And I always like to start with purpose. I think that's really the heart of where performance management, we need to start with why are we doing things. And the heart of this study is really around helping practitioners eradicate bad warehousing practices. And it's really being able to helping them understand and identify where do we have a major opportunity to improve so that we can move the needle higher on performance. One of the key aspects of benchmarking that a lot of people forget about is that we have to understand where we currently are at. So how are we performing today before we can actually start any benchmarking or process improvement efforts, because we have to understand where we're at and where we need to go. And that's really the heart of what this study does, is that it helps warehouse practitioners know where they're at and where they need to go.
So the idea is it focuses on the warehouse management concepts, obviously processes, and also does it take a look at technology as well?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question about technology. It's something that we have looked at. The first time we looked at it in the study was in 2008, and we just focused really on basic automation, conveyables, material handling units, ASRS systems, having a WMS in our facility, the impact that performance may have on that, and what are we really using. It was more about what is the current state. It was interesting. I read a JBL article, Journal of Business Logistics article from 1991, where over 50% of executives are interested in automating their warehouse. Are automating their facilities. And yet here we are in 2019 and still talking about automating and automation. I don't think it's something that's going to go away or change. I think the technologies available to us have evolved to something that's much better and that will help us achieve higher level of performance. But I think at the end of the day, we're still struggling with that. And so in 2008, we wanted to understand where we were at. And then again, we looked at it in 2010, and then we looked at it in 2018. So last year's report, we did a deeper dive and see where we were at 10 years later, and also looking at those new emerging technologies that weren't around, such as social media, adaptive manufacturing, or 3D printing. Blockchain is something that's relatively new still. We've looked at technology and the impact, and that's something that we also focused on again this year in the 2019 report, in trying to understand what's the impact in the processes by number of steps, and was there a reduction or an increase in the number of steps based off of the technology.
The report, Joe, has been around 16 years. Are the metrics, do they stay the same year to year that you're focusing on? And then I know you have a SCOR background. Are they aligned with SCOR metrics, or are your metrics becoming the standard for warehouses today?
That's an interesting question. So overall, the study has been around for 16 years. 2019 marks our 16th year of the study. The very first study in 2003, which was Carl Manrope, Mary Holcomb, and Stephen Rutner, and they looked at, what measures of performance are we using in our facilities? And this is 2003. It started out with, I think, like 350 different measures or metrics that are being used, and just trying to understand and narrow it down to a manageable number. And what are the most popular measures? And then it just evolves over time. So right now we are at 36 different metrics that we're tracking, or KPIs. So we view them as process level measures, which can be used as key performance indicators. In terms of defining and calculations, and I think that's really where SCOR would come in, we have made comparisons between SCOR's model and the metrics that they use. We've made comparisons where APQC, we worked with the Order Fulfillment Council at MHI, the Material Handling Institute. We've worked with MESA, Manufacturers Enterprise Solutions Association, I think, MESA. And this was a number of years ago in aligning our definitions and calculations on metrics. One of the biggest differences is that WERC looks at perfect order as an index, whereas SCOR looks at perfect order as perfect order fulfillment. Mm-hmm. So it's 0 or 1, essentially. 1, we got it right. 0, we missed something. When we use the perfect order index, we realize, or we think of an order may have multiple issues with it. So that should impact performance, not just once, but multiple times, because you missed 2 things. And that's why we look at it as an index. You know, it's not just that, you know, it came in damaged, but it was also late. And that's going to have an even more of an impact on the customer than just saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, it wasn't perfect. And it's a lot, and you know, and when we did that, it was a lot quicker to focus, or we can quickly focus and go, okay, how am I doing today compared to everybody else? Or how am I doing as an executive? How are we doing on the perfect order? And then quickly drill down based off of that. So that's probably the biggest difference between the two. Other than that, we don't have, you know, high level defined KPIs that the SCOR model does, like level 1 metrics. You know, you will find a number of the measures that we use, a number of metrics in ours, also in SCOR as well, in terms of, you know, there's just similarities. And there's, you know, facilities are using what facilities are using. Definitions and calculations may be altered slightly.
Yeah, it's still customers expect their products on time and the right price and the right quantities. So it's
all
the
those
same whether it's DC metrics or WERC or SCOR. So it's interesting for the APICS fans in the audience. You'll understand the perfect order fulfillment index, and we call it the 7 rights of logistics from a body of knowledge standpoint. So it's good to see that consistency.
Yep, absolutely.
So do you have any key observations from the 2019 report, or any trends? Or
Well, I think in this year's report, in terms of key observations, it's we look every year. One of the things we want to understand is, well, what measures are changing, or what are we using, or what are the most important measures? So we look at it in terms of the top 12, and we've been reporting out the top 12 since 2010, I believe it was. Prior to that, it was the top 10, but we had a change in calculations and how we were collecting data that changed how we had to do it. So we do the top 12 now. And what's one of the 2 interesting aspects to that is that in 2017, on-time shipments, which was the top measure, it was almost king for the majority of the study, was displaced. And then this year, I think it's number 5 in the top 12. But it was real interesting because average warehouse capacity took the top slot. And then order picking accuracy. And in 2019, it was, for this year's study, it's order picking accuracy is the number 1 metric. And it's just interesting that because we do this every year, we can kind of track the changes in what are we seeing in terms of the economy, in terms of issues in supply chain. We can see that effect because we're looking backwards. Okay, so in 2019, we're looking at 2018 performance. We can't predict the future, but we can always look back at how performance and what has happened. And so order picking accuracy was the number 1 metric in the 2019 study versus average warehouse capacity. So an average warehouse capacity had been top for a couple of years now. And that makes a lot of sense, especially as we gear up as in an e-commerce perspective. We have to have product in place. We have to have goods in our facilities, being able to support, you know, customers when they order something and having it there when they order it. It's interesting when you think about that, because you look at Amazon, who's now reaching out to their suppliers and pushing back to some extent and saying, hey, we want to ship directly from your facility versus us bringing in orders to ship. Because I know that there was a discussion, I believe it was last year, it was an article I read where they were starting to do that with a number of their major suppliers. We're going to ship directly. We would rather ship directly from your facility versus ours. Frees up capacity, adds for them. They can add additional products in their facilities for that as well.
Well, it's interesting to see average warehouse capacity, you said, is not one of the top metrics again. So I guess that's more of an asset-based metric. So you're measuring how full or how utilized is your warehouse. Yep. I'm surprised that supersedes the customer focus. I'm sure customer focus is still there, but do you think that has anything? Because I still hear a lot in the news, Joe, about, especially with the tariffs and everything else going on, warehouse capacity is at max in the States. And maybe that's one of the reasons why.
No, I would definitely agree. That's definitely one of the reasons why you have the tariffs come in and before they were implemented. And that's when we saw this effect happen, right? With the average warehouse capacity being number 1. You know, and I don't want to say that customer focus still isn't there, because you still see it represented in the top 12. But it's interesting that inbound operations, or operations period, just inbound and outbound metrics tend to populate the top 12. we still look, we like to look at and think of things in terms of balance and how are we balancing. So going back to the balance scorecard, we're looking at, our customers, we're looking at internal at our employees, we're looking at our financials, so costs and the impact that we have on that. And then on capacity and accuracy are really huge pieces of that puzzle in terms of balance. And we haven't had a balanced top 12 or top 10 in the study since 2008, I believe was the last time it was actually balanced, or 2009. It was one of those 2 years. We actually had DC costs up there. We had capacity, average warehouse capacity. We had operations, both inbound, outbound operations, and we had customer measures. And annual workforce turnover, which was the key employee metric that we had for a number of years. That was also in the top 10 that year. So we had all 4 major areas of the balance scorecard represented, and we haven't really seen that. And that's a trend, I think if you want to look at a trend, we just haven't seen that balance.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's another nod to the APICS body of knowledge. We talk about having balanced scorecards in terms of using your KPIs. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think balance is important in making sure that we're looking at everything and that we have that visual. Are we doing the right things in that terms? So that's really good if we can have it. But it's really interesting. When we talk about we hear a lot about cost in supply chain. We hear, especially in warehousing distribution, we're typically, DC's warehouses are a cost center for most organizations. It's not a profit center. It's definitely not an investment center, unless you're an e-commerce company and it takes over your retail stores, because that's what it is. We still see the accuracy capacity portion of it. We're still focused on internal operations, but in terms of cost centers, and that's really what warehouses are known as, and it's typically the cost center of the organization. They don't look at it as being part of having a competitive advantage. So there is going to be a difference in the measures that are used, but what is interesting based on that is that we don't see costs coming up in the top 12 at all. The last year that we had 50 full measures, which would be DC costs as a percent of sales, DC costs as percent of COGS, cost of goods sold, and DC it costs as per unit shipped. What was interesting in that year, DC costs as a percent of sales was in the top 25. DC costs per unit shipped was in the top 30, and DC costs as a percent of COGS was in the top 40. So, if that gives you any indication. So we say we're cost focused, or it's so important for us to reduce costs, but yet we are not measuring. And now I don't want to say it could be, there are reasons that it may not necessarily be. Okay, that's not the metric we're using to determine costs. Could definitely be. But when we talk with people, that's usually the one that they're looking at. Why is it so low? If it's so important, why is it so low? And so in 2015, we looked at strategy. And what is strategy's impact on performance in the warehouse? One of the foundations of performance management, we've been teaching this, you probably teach it as well as part of your theory, is that we have to be aligned to our overall organizational strategy. Michael Porter has 3 strategies: cost leadership, customer service, differentiation. We look at differentiation as being innovation in product or in operations, so innovative. And then he said, you can be a mix, but you're really crazy if you do that, essentially, and it's never going to work. You can't focus on both customer service and cost reduction and be a cost leader. It's just not going to happen because you can't make the trade-off decisions that you need to maintain alignment with for the overall organization. What we found is that those that said we have a cost leadership strategy, that's what our overall organizational strategy is, they had the most alignment on measures that they were using within the facility for internal DC operations, warehouse operations, and they were the only strategy that had workforce or had talent, employee focus, but they had no cost focus. They had no agreement on any of the DC cost measures that we have.
In our prep, Joe, I talked about the triple bottom line and how companies are being measured against not only the profitability, but how they're impacting the planet and how they're impacting the people. Do you see those things like social responsibility and sustainability? Do you see those things getting down to your level of metrics in the warehouse?
We haven't heard a lot, or in talking with work members, DC velocity readers, other people that we meet in the course of our jobs, students that we have that have asked that question or looked at it. We could, and if we had the measures, if there was a measure that we knew that the data could be captured for it at the warehouse level and the impact shown, then we would definitely include it. But from what we've heard and from what we've seen, we're not seeing a lot of people that are collecting a lot of data on that. Is it important? Absolutely. Could we look at it in different ways? Just thinking right here, how are we dealing with returns? Okay, that's going to be a big thing. How are we dealing with packaging in our facility? That's huge. Are we rethinking how we're doing packaging? One of the things that I learned from John Mascaratolo was don't ship air, don't ship water. And I go back to IKEA because I remember when IKEA sold tea light candles in a bag, 100 to a bag, and it was just a bag. They did a study that showed that instead of shipping them in bags, if we ship them as a brick instead, stacking them, we can get the same amount shipped in a much smaller space. So we take up less carbon footprint and we have a few less emissions during the transport portion of it. So, and then also we lower our classification because now it's not a big box that we're, and full of bags and air. We can make it smaller, more compact so we can actually help our carriers cube out their trailers a little bit better. So there are aspects that could be used. My question is, do the facilities have access to that level of data to be able to provide that? And that's more the concern.
Triple bottom line is more of a strategic decision. And as you know, Joe, most warehouses are strictly execution focused. So getting products shipped to the customers in time. So I can see that. But, historically, there's been a labor crunch in the warehousing side. Is that still prevalent today?
Oh, absolutely.
So that would have something to do with, how you treat people and how you're going to retain employees.
And to me, that's one of the most sustainable resources we actually have is people in our facilities. At the WERC conference in May of this year, Annette Danik-Akey and her colleague did a presentation on how Penguin Random House is tackling the labor issue within their facility. And part of it is location. And then two, it's how they treat their people. And they look at it as, one, we want to treat everybody equally. So how do you do that? If our CEO is getting 4 weeks off, you know what? Everybody else in the organization should have the same amount of time off. They do sabbaticals. So every 10 years, I believe it is, they do a sabbatical. So you are given 4 weeks off in addition to your vacation to go and leave and not think about work, and you can do whatever you want to on that time. And it really brings back the employees. They really refresh. If they go out, they can choose to do whatever they want to with that time. And a lot of them come back with new ideas and new things that they want to implement. And then on the labor front, on the talent side, and getting in the workers that they need, they focused on a really inventive way of designing their operations so that they can have people and pull from a candidate of people that normally wouldn't participate in the labor market. So you have folks that have kids that are now stay at home. They are free between, say, 10 and 2 p.m. And there's an app that Penguin Random House uses that people in their community who want to, say, spend 4 or 5 hours working because they have 4 or 5 hours free time, their kids are in school, it helps create a flexible workforce in some ways. They're not, some days we may not need 20 people in picking, and other days we may need 20 people. So it creates that ability, and they can send out notifications that, hey, we have a need, and they can sign up and choose to do that. It makes it a little bit harder on the management side, on supervising people, but they've had really good responses. They've had really good performance out of it, and it's worked tremendously well. And there was a lot of research that they had to do internally to drive that in determining, if we have so many people in a functional area or in an area of the facility, how many full-time equivalents do we need to have to support that area? And giving, with the 4-week vacations a year, that's going to change the dynamics of how many full-time equivalents. And I think it only came up to like 1.5 FTEs needed in addition to what their current workforce was. So, that's huge.
You talk about the labor supply. As a longtime work member yourself, Joe, you probably remember that several years ago there was a big push for getting special needs type of people into the warehouses, or designing processes or workflows that they could do those types of things. Is that still prevalent, you think?
But Randy Lewis has done a great job when he before he left Walgreens and retired in getting that started. But it was but you saw that kind of movement pick up, and there's still a lot of people that are coming in that are still carrying that on and moving forward with it. So I don't think it's gone anywhere. There's still companies looking at how do we do that. I mean, it is a pool of labor. And then on the flip side of it too is that you also have another pool of labor to pull from. And this one will be interesting to watch the developments of, but it's the returned citizens.
What does that mean, returned citizens?
So returned citizens are those individuals that have been incarcerated for a period of time and are returning back to or to the population at large. So integrating them back in is always key. Trying to break that chain of that cycle of coming in and going out, we have to integrate them back into society as a whole and give them purpose. I think that's one of the key aspects of it, and having a job and having support coming back. They've spent their time, they've done their time, they've paid for what they've done. So, it'll be an interesting way to see what happens and how that develops. There is a nonprofit out of New York that has been working with returned citizens and giving them, working to give them a second chance and helping them develop entrepreneurial skills that they can then go into business for themselves.
I don't have the name specifically, Joe, but I think there's a nonprofit in Georgia where they basically hire returned citizens. I think they're building tables or something. I'll have to research that and find out that organization. One of the things you said is location has a lot to do with the labor supply, obviously the pool, what's available. What I've seen lately is, Joe, warehouses, I guess, are moving more into urban environments. Do you see that at all, or is that something that you measure or report on?
It's not something that we've really measured or reported on, but I think you're going to see that, especially for companies that want to have an e-commerce strategy. And if you want to do same-day delivery or next-day delivery, you're going to have to be as close to the population as you possibly can. And that brings up micro-warehousing, right? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term micro-warehousing.
No.
Talked with a gentleman earlier this year that they focus on micro-warehousing in the greater New York area, mainly in the Manhattan area, but they have essentially a 40-foot container, so an ocean container, 40 feet, and they are supporting same-day delivery in the Manhattan, downtown New York City area from various places. Well, what do you have to combat there? Because there's a lot of retail locations that are going out of business because of high rents and location for real estate. What they do is they've put in containers in parking decks that they're paying a fee for taking up so many spaces, and the parking decks are not highly utilized parking decks. So this is another form of revenue that's coming in to the management companies of those parking facilities. They are moving very high, fast-moving items. So, we talk about ABC items in warehousing, and, that's the speed at which a product or an item or a SKU is going to move. A's are your fast-movings, and in this case, I'd call them triple A's, because these are the things that are going to be needed and are going to be something that you're picking every single day. The funny thing is, in how I'm viewing this, and I think it's great, but we've not really changed anything other than instead of going into a store, looking at the product and purchasing it, we pull out our phone on our app and we make a purchase and then it's delivered. Okay, so we've cut the retail store, the retail store out of the equation, but you still have to have a retail store. You still have to have something there that supports that and moving into that urban environment and being able to fulfill that. So that container is doing that. It takes a lot of data to understand, what items should we have at that location? And then you still have to back up and you have to be able to replenish that location. So you have to have another DC or another warehouse that supports that facility. And it may be, it doesn't have to be, could be a 20,000 square foot facility, for example, or a 50,000 square foot facility, depending on how many containers in the micro warehousing environment that you're fulfilling to. But what's really interesting is that we see the basics of warehousing playing out, the basics of distribution playing out, and the basics don't change. Because that's really putting a lot of emphasis on doing analytics and having and what the purpose of analytics is for. I don't remember exactly what products were being stored there, what they're fulfilling, but you know what? They're making a go at it. They're working hard. Let me look up the name and I'll get that back to you, Chris. But they are, it's just been really interesting to kind of watch and hear what they're doing. But when you get down to it, the basics hasn't changed at all. And instead of having a retail store that you drive your car to, you pull out your phone, you open the app, and you make your selections, and then a package is dropped off an hour later, 5 hours later, 8 hours later, whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The basics of warehousing haven't changed. It's still providing a time and place utility. What people want when they want it, and whether it's a store, a warehouse, a micro warehouse, which is a new term. We'll have to check that out. It was interesting. I talk about a lot of the theories, but it's neat to see things in practice. I was at recently, Joe, Steinmart, which is a southeastern, like a tier 2 clothing retailer, and I was checking out, and the lady had an iPad or a tablet, and she was actually doing e-commerce when there was nobody to check out at the line. She was fulfilling e-commerce orders from the store. I thought that was a pretty interesting. I mean, I've heard about it. I've just never seen it in practice.
It's kind of like that click list or thing that's Kroger or some, Walmart's doing something similar too, where they're doing fulfillment out of the store. Target's doing the same thing. It makes sense. Why not be able to just drive up, receive your groceries, and then drive off? You have in certain areas, Amazon's already taking off and doing deliveries from Whole Foods locations locally. I noticed now Kroger is offering that in my hometown, where I currently live in Germantown, Tennessee. So I could do an order and they will deliver it to my door. So I think that's interesting. But one of the interesting things, we talked about technology just a bit earlier. One of the most basic technologies that every facility, I think, should have at some level is going to be barcodes. They're in every single store, every single grocery store. But we're now to a point we can do handheld scanners, and we've moved them down.
On your smartphone or?
Well, that's the question. Why hasn't Kroger moved to just using an app on your smartphone to deliver it? Where they have a device in store, it's an RF scanner. You walk around, you scan it. It takes an inventory list of what you're purchasing or what you've put in your basket. And you walk out, you scan a barcode on the self-checkout line. It loads everything up. You insert payment, and then you take it out. Is it faster? I found it faster. So, I think it's neat. And I think you definitely should do it. You know what? And it's nice because they have 2 areas in our store now where you have self-checkout. And I'm breezing through and I'm looking at everybody else. And if they're in the self-checkout line, they're having to scan everything. And I'm like, I've already done that. So, I've moved the bottleneck out, for me, and for a number of customers that just want to go in. If they want to grab one thing, boom, boom, and you're done after grabbing it and checking out. But and even if I'm buying a lot of stuff, I can go in and I get a grocery cart full, and we scan it, put it in, and we walk out to check out. Everything's already bagged. Everything, you kind of move where you're doing multiple steps at one location. You're spreading those steps out to several different places and accumulating it, so that when you get to the checkout line, it's not a bottleneck anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people don't realize this, but a retail store is basically a form of warehouse, right? The consumer is the picker. Yeah, and you're just checking out. You go to the pack station, which happens to be the cashier, and that's really a form of warehousing.
Well, I mean, and a lot of people don't, if we want to bring warehousing and more visibility to it, I think that we have to start talking about warehousing in the fact that you have a pantry in your home, you have a refrigerator in your home. Both of those are types of warehouses.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and you're the final mile delivery. Is
exactly.
Grabs it out of the fridge.
to the stove, to the table,
Yeah,
so.
and we could start talking a whole different topic on APICS again, is the Kanban systems. So when I take my last carton of milk out, that's a trigger that I need to replenish, and that's a whole different level of discussion, Joe.
Yeah, no, I know. And then you can add in slotting, and I love talking with my friend Sheila Benny at Optricity about slotting, and it's really interesting. Because she was the one that mentioned to me, she even slots her own pantry. And I said, oh, I get it. I totally get it. I'm all organized in my pantry. There's certain, on this shelf, I have the ketchup and the mayonnaise for when it needs to be replenished in the refrigerator. And I've got it slotted where I can easily go get it and pull it in. So, I mean, there's a lot of processes in warehousing that, are very similar to what we do in our everyday lives. It's just, we have to stop and think about it. And it gets back down to, well, what are those basics again?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all the 80-20 rule, in my view. Life revolves around the 80-20. You talk about slotting and for refrigeration. I was tickled pink when I bought my first refrigerator that had the freezer on the bottom and the refrigerator on the top, because 80% of the time you're reaching into the refrigerator, right? So why should you have to bend down when you're doing that? So you limit the bending down to the freezer, which is on the bottom, if you have that type of refrigerator. Right. Anyhow, so that's the concepts that we talk about. So you had talked about bottlenecks, which, again, from an APICS body of knowledge standpoint, we talk theory of constraints a lot more in production, but I'm glad to see that applies to warehousing as well.
Oh, Penguin Random House, another great. I love Penguin Random House. They're great people up there, and they do really interesting work. And that was something that they looked at, and they've applied the theory of constraints to warehousing in their facility. They did a great presentation a number of years ago, and that's really what got Annette, who's the current president of WERC, involved was doing a presentation, and I believe it was around a theory of constraints and how it was applied. And if I remember correctly, Annette's also an engineer by training, so that might explain some things. But, when it comes to distribution and warehousing, she's definitely got the smarts for it.
So, Joe, what's the future of the report? Another 16 years, or how is it going to evolve?
It really depends on participation. It really depends on how performance evolves and if it evolves. And that was one of the questions, too, in the study the last 2 years, trying to gauge how is digital supply chain or digital technology going to change measurement. That's something that we've looked at in terms of evolving. So we're always looking at how can we, what needs to change with the study. We don't want to be a static study every year with the same information. We have the same information every year in terms of the heart of the study, which is those benchmarks. So if I want to know if I have a major opportunity to improve on on-time shipments or if I'm already best in class, I have that ability. But the overall report, looking at strategy, how does strategy impact performance? Looking at technology, how is technology impacting performance? Looking at talent. And what is talent's impact on performance? And we talk, there's a lot of talk on agility and flexibility. And when I say agility here, I'm talking about little a agility, not big A agility. And I'm sure there's a whole nother podcast for that too. But, when we talk, we looked at this year and we've been collecting data for the last several years on agility and flexibility in a warehouse. And Donnie did a really great job on that. And that's why, Donnie came in was to help us better understand the labor portion because we didn't have a lot of employee metrics. So now we are tracking employee measures such as cross-train percentage. We have annual workforce turnover, just to name a few. And some of the we were measuring some of the OSHA metrics such as days away from work due to a lost time accident and things like that. So we are evolving, we are changing in terms of what are we measuring, what should be measured, and then what topics are impacting warehouses, facilities, distribution centers today, and trying to gather data and knowledge so that we can share that information so that those that participate, those that would like to read more, understand more about the report, they can easily read through it and see how it may impact them. So, and it's really interesting stuff that we find.
So, Joe, my guess is, back to the participate, your study's only as good as the data that you get into it, right? The input. So how do people participate?
Okay, so one of the things that you have to remember about this study is that we are surveying, is the population that we're surveying. And the population that we're surveying, we send out a invitation by email every year from WERC. So if you're a member or if you've had any association with WERC, you receive an email, as well as DC Velocity magazine. So those are our two populations that we're drawing from. Okay, so when you think about performance, you need also in the study itself think also about the population. These are people, these are individuals who are very geared towards this and are really looking for opportunities to improve and are trying to improve their knowledge. So to participate, and that's always key. If you participate, we provide the report to you for free. So you provide your data. You have to provide and identify yourself within the report in order within the study in order to receive that, because we have no way to determine who has actually participated unless you do provide that. We do maintain that confidentially. Only 2 people ever know who's actually participated, myself and Carl. So we try to, again, it's highly anonymous in so many ways. Your data, when you share it, we randomize it so that nobody else would ever know because it's in an aggregate amount.
So do you need more input, more companies to participate, or do you have too many already? Or
Oh, you never have too many. You never have too many. Don't ask an academic or a consultant if you have too many. More data. So, we've been running around 400 to 500 participants for the last 6-7 years now. At one point, we had up to 1,000 participants, I believe it was, and that was 2007, 2008. Our measures can only improve, and the accuracy of the report can only improve if we have more participants. So that's always key, and that's one of the things to always remember.
So do people they have to get a link from you to participate?
If they want to volunteer, they can send an email to me. So the survey is released every year in January. So we start collecting data usually through the month of January. Okay. So mid-January to the end of January, we do several email blasts to people. If you send us a link, hey, Joe, I'm interested in participating in this, would love to provide data for it, then we will add you to our list to make sure that you receive it and make sure that you get notified of that. By participating, again, the benefit to you is that you get the full report.
So if somebody just right this second wanted to send you a note, where would they send an email to?
Metrics at work at werc.org. That's metrics, METRICS at werc.org.
Sounds like you've done this before. So you're looking for more participation, or you
always looking for more participation. Yep.
You had mentioned that the report, you participate and you get the report for free. So I guess there's a fee for it, the report,
yes.
If you're not.
So the 2019 report is available on werc.org, work.org. Go to Resources tab, click on, in the drop-down menu, click on DC Measures, and you can find a copy of the report to purchase. It's $550 for non-members. For members, I believe it's $175.
Oh, so it's worth being a member.
Yes. So membership, last I checked, was still $275, which it has been for a nice good while. It stays pretty steady and consistent. So that's one of the great things about WERC. But the report itself, so it's not just provided for free to the membership, but if you participate by providing your data, it is free for you.
And I know the study has sponsors as well. I think
Kenco and Yale have been longtime sponsors of the report. I think we're going on 5 or 6 years for Yale, and I believe Kenco's been participating in a while. And I think it just really shares that the value that they place on learning and continuous learning in this area. It's been phenomenal to have their support, because this study really wouldn't be possible without them, as well as WERC and DC Velocity Magazine. And then last year, one of the things that we're trying to do is broaden our perspective so that we're just not focused on North American companies, but internationally as well. And that's been one of the key things. And UKWA, the United Kingdom Warehouse Association, has been participating as well. So they started participating last year. And, prior to that, we were about 95% North American companies, and then we had another 5% from elsewhere in the world. In 2019, we had 88% North American companies. So, that the international participation has increased, and that's a good thing.
The one nod to one of your sponsors, Joe, I know Kenco at kenco.com, you can go there and get a watered down version of the study.
Yep. So we do 2 different versions of the report. So the handout and the conference report abbreviated version is what we hand out at the conference. That's what Kenco, Yale receive to hand out as well. And that's probably the version you're referring to.
Yes.
So the full report, I think this year are 11 pages, but that doesn't include the definitions and calculations. Sure. And and that's one of the questions we get all the time is how do we know what's provided is accurate? And we know that providing the calculations and a definition and standardizing those, we're going to get the right responses back.
So Joe, several times you've mentioned WERC. What is WERC, and how are they involved with this?
So WERC, or WERC, which is the Warehouse Education and Research Council, they've been around since the mid-'70s. We're over 40 years old now. That's pretty awesome. So WERC has been around, and their focus is on helping logistics professionals improve performance and understand what's going on and to provide education. So education, part of the name, research, another part of the name, and that's where this support comes from. And I think that's really what their goal is. And it's a great organization if you're in warehousing, distribution, you want to find information, meet like-minded professionals, network. This is a great avenue to go down because everyone is so nice and they are always so open to bringing new people in and meeting new people. And it's just, that's one of the things that we hear from conference participants every year is that, I came to work and it was just so friendly. I met new people and it was like I was an old chum coming in, being welcomed home. Again, so, and then that's kind of what makes WERC, I think, a lot more different than some of the others out there. So,
yeah, and I've been to a few WERC events in the past, conferences specifically. What I noticed about it and I enjoyed about it was it's not a dating game. It's, there are vendors there and solution providers, but it's more about learning, understanding key concepts and trends, but you don't have to worry about walking around the corner and getting hit up by a salesperson. So that's it's really a purist organization for warehousing and distribution center professionals. So check that out if you can. And their conference is in next spring. I think it's in Providence, Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. So, in I believe you should eat your own dog food. So anything that you preach or practicing out there, then you need to do it yourself. So I have my own balanced score. Well, I don't even call it the balanced scorecard anymore, but my blended scorecard for life. And one of the key metrics on my blended scorecard was going someplace new every year. And WERC has really helped me with that in a number of ways. And in 2016, we went to Providence, Rhode Island. We were there in 2016, and we are going back in 2020. So that took off the last state that I had on the East Coast. So my East Coast states are done. I don't have to worry about them anymore, but I get to go back to Providence. It was a great town. It was a phenomenal experience. Loved it. So definitely looking forward to that. So, depending on what your own personal metrics are, you try to find ways to kind of satisfy both at the same time if you can.
So yeah, it is a professional association, membership driven, and it sounds to me like you said, if you're signing up to be a member, you'll automatically have access to a discount on that report.
The DC Measures report was one of the first benchmarking pieces that were put out and developed. And the second piece of that was actually the processes and looking at, well, what are process benchmarks? So how should this process look within warehousing? Warehousing and order fulfillment best practices guide came out that looks at and divides the warehouse up into 8 different process areas. And then within each process areas, you have processes that have to, and benchmarks for those. So when dock management, what does that look like for a major opportunity performer versus someone that's best in class? And what does best in class? And it's the qualitative part of this. The DC Measure study is the quantitative portion of this research. You have to have both. You can't do one without the other. You have to use both of them in tandem in order to benchmark and improve performance. This is one piece of that.
So yeah, they have many other publications available through WERC that you can order. You don't have to be a member, but you get that discount. I know they've got a great little publication called WMS Selection Strategies, so I'll plug that one there. You can check that out if you need to. Well, as I say, after 16 years, it's becoming a perennial all-star, especially in terms of measuring performance of your warehouse operation. So thank you for your participation. Joe, when you're not investing in this study, what are some of the other things that you're doing?
Well, through T-Squared Logistics, I do regulatory training and training on performance management and continuous improvement processes. So helping companies improve performance and finding ways to do that, or just doing education. I prefer to calling it education and research versus training, and then the research portion. So for example, through WERC and SCMR, so Supply Chain Management Review, we did a study on analytics usage in warehousing. The article's coming out later this year in November, and it's slated for the November issue, so definitely keep an eye out for that. I don't want to spoil anything on it because I think there's some ahas from it that really surprised us and made us no, I don't want to give out any teasers. Just note that we're far more advanced than what we realize. So I think that that's the teaser. So come and make sure to watch out for that report. But the other thing I like to look at is, what's the impact of hazmat and hazardous materials on our facilities and operations? Because, we talk a lot about reducing costs, and it's really interesting with other, when we ship hazmat, if the package is returned because it's not properly marked, labeled, documented, we just paid for that to be shipped. It was returned. Guess what? We have to pay for it to be shipped again on that and say, oh, correct it and we'll take it back. No, we had to do that process. And, that's going to impact our costs. And when you have a number of packages that are returned, that impacts costs. And for the DC, you make a mistake. And what's really interesting is that luckily carriers, especially for air shipments, they're really invested in checking and making sure everything is filled and completed. Because if there's an error, then that means there might be an error somewhere else, or we didn't do something appropriate. And it's really interesting. And it's not just that, but there's other impacts that it can have if you don't do it correctly.
So where I'm sitting at the table with you, Joe, and there's a big giant book called Dangerous Goods Regulations. What's this all about?
You're looking at the IATA, so that's the International Air Transport Association's Dangerous Goods Regulations, and that is for shipping dangerous goods by air. That's one of the training courses that I provide through T-Squared Logistics to my clients, to shippers, especially to shippers. That's all the requirements and regulations that you have to meet in order to successfully ship a package by air. If it's returned, well, there goes on-time shipments. That goes blown right out the door. On-time delivery, you can forget that. Did we increased costs? Yeah, absolutely. Because it was $287 to ship it the first time, and the customer wanted it next day air. It got returned, so now it's delayed because it sat there for a day before it got returned back to you. And then, you have that additional charge because you're going to have to pay that all over again. So that's, I like round numbers, so we'll say $600 right there that we just paid out. And if we were using FedEx now, that would have been another $350 on top of that.
So if a company needed to have better compliance or understanding of dangerous goods regulations, they could contact you and
absolutely do training, do audits, see, understand your processes and where things are going. One of the biggest things one of my shippers has done is, so IATA provides checklists. And this is the checklist that the operators use to return a package because they have to identify to the shipper what's missing, if something is missing, and why the package was returned and have it documented. One of my shippers and we worked together to create a checklist that incorporated most of that, but you have 3 people that check it. The person that packed it has to go and prepared the package, has to go through and check everything, making sure everything's on there. A second person who's not the same person audits it, and then a third person signs off on it before it's shipped, saying that everything has been checked and everything that's required by the regulations is on this package. I mean, it gets expensive, when you have multiple packages being returned because you forgot UN 1888 or chloroform as the proper shipping name, or you didn't put a Class 8 hazard label on there, or you put the wrong Class 6 Division 1 hazard label. There are impacts that happen, yeah. So one of the things that T-Squared's done is we are working with logisticstrainingcenter.com to provide additional training in warehousing, logistics, transportation especially. And we have courses that we are developing with SMC3 right now that are going to start launching live. So we are slated to have our first course, Course 201, Fundamentals of Less Than Truckload Transportation, out by end of September, I believe. And we should have 3 or 4 more courses following up closely behind that. We're currently in beta testing for those courses and almost have them completely ready, as well as my hazmat training course. So that one's already up, and we're kind of in a soft launch mode. But if you're new to transportation, if you've been moved from one department to another and now you've got transportation responsibilities and you're working with LTL carriers and you're a shipper and you want to know, how can I improve my rates, or how do I even do rates and understand what rates we have and what our classification is, this is definitely the courses for you. Or, if you're a student and you just got a job in transportation, you have no background, that's not what you got your degree in, that's totally fine. And I think actually that's probably pretty good too, because it brings a new perspective, a new fresh set of eyes that has a different thinking process on things. These are the courses that are for you. For those courses, it's really understanding what is less than truckload transportation, what are the impacts, how does a carrier cost a shipment, how does a shipper supposed to price a shipment, and understanding how to find those rates and tariffs.
Okay, and if anybody's interested in these types of classes, they can contact you direct?
Well, you're more than welcome to always contact me directly.
Sure.
But you can go to logisticstrainingcenter.com, which is our main page, and you'll find the courses and more information on the courses. You can also go to smc3.com as well. So they are advertised on SMC3 as well. We are looking to get them up and get going with it. And it's, if you want to certify your body of knowledge and your information, then, SMC3 will be offering a certified and less than truckload transportation certification in the near future with that.
It's good to have those resources available. As we wrap down, Joe, I used to see you around on the speaking tour. You're not speaking as much as you used to, or where would somebody see you if they wanted to, besides going to Germantown?
Just call me and let me know where you're at. I think more seriously, so I'm always at the WERC conference every year. Definitely think it's a great conference. I'm at CSCMP. It just all depends where I'm at and what I'm doing and what's going on. So
no specific keynotes on the schedule?
Nothing in the near future. So there's a couple of opportunities on the horizon. So, and every year at WERC is a definite MODEX. So you'll probably see me at MODEX.
And to conclude, Joe, again, appreciate your time here, but I know the study is a lot more than you. You have any co-authors that help you with this, or just want to share a little love if we can?
Oh, well, and I thought I had shared some love already.
Yes,
but
you mentioned Donnie and Carl, but
yeah, absolutely.
Who are those figures lurking in the background?
The study was started really with Carl, and I got started in it with as Carl's grad assistant on it, and working with Kate Vitasic. So Kate kind of helped get the study evolved into what it is today as the DC Measures report and actual benchmarks. So Donnie Williams, he's a professor at the University of Arkansas. Carl Manroth's at Georgia College and State University, or Georgia College in Milledgeville, Georgia. They are the academic side of this. What's really great about both Donnie and Carl is that they're very practitioner focused. And so they're always meeting with practitioners, with people in the industry, trying to understand what's going on and trying to apply the research. And I think that's a great thing. So it's how do we apply that research to what's really going on?
I'm a big fan of Dr. Carl. Obviously, we have the advantage, we in Atlanta have the advantage of having him as a local resource, and he will occasionally be at a networking event talking about the metrics report and those other types of things. Yeah. So I would encourage you, if you're a fan of networking and supply chain, just get out and attend anything that you see Dr. Carl at. So, or Joe. Well, Joe, again, thanks for your time.
All right, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity, and always happy to chat about DC Measures and WERC and what's going on in the world of performance management.
And the study, not the report.
And the study, not the report.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
We would like to thank our sponsors, Nobody. We don't have any sponsors yet, but we thank you for listening. If you think these are good messages and align with your products or services, send us a note at chris@apicscoach.com.